recording is on. Just give me 1 second, just confirming. Yeah. So going back to, again, welcome back. And obviously, this is, as I mentioned, one of the core units that we are looking at starting. I think we've done quite okay in terms of timeline with regards to, the coverage of units so far. So we have looked at one of the units, which is Brief History of Medicine, which is one of the core units. Again, we've done infectious diseases, which is one of the core units again. And then we are now looking at the third and the most important unit, which is the aspects of human physiology. So what you see on your screen, and before I start, what I want to do is just briefly give you a sense of what all is going to be covered in this particular unit. So what you have on your screen right now that you see is the indicative spec. And this indicative spec essentially shows you, the content that we are going to be covering in this particular unit. So there are two learning outcomes. One looks at understanding the human body and human body systems. There are 7 systems in particular that we are going to be looking at covering, which will be nervous system, digestive system, excretory systems, cardiovascular system, digestive system, endocrine system, and we'll also be looking at the respiratory system. So these are 7 systems that we're going to be looking at studying to understand the human body and how the human body functions. The second learning outcome is focused on homeostasis. This is a technical or let's say technical term. And what we would want to understand with the homeostasis and the meaning of homeostasis is how do these systems actually work in terms of helping the organism to do the basic functions, things like, excretion, things like digestion, things like, circulation. And this is a key process which happens within the human body. And most of these systems that we're going to study in Learning Outcome 1 would basically be looking at following this fundamental concept in biology, which refers to the state of maintaining a steady internal environment. So homeostasis refers to chemical, physical reactions which happen within the body with the secretion of hormones, certain chemicals, and they help maintain what is called the stable internal environment within the body. That means you are able to function as an organism. And that is what we would want to understand when we look at the concept of homeostasis. So things like, any sort of physiological processes which basically, help circulate the nutrients, and also the blood, playing a major or a vital role in circulating nutrients, maintaining the body temperature, and looking at, maintaining the concentration of the pH and the iron balance within the body, so that all the organs and everything is able to work as usual, as normal, would be the process that we would look at studying, in homeostasis. And in this particular learning outcome, we'll be looking at focusing primarily on the endocrine system. So when we look at the endocrine system of the body of the body is vital primarily because it is directly related with the process of homeostasis. So it is a system which triggers any sort of negative, feedback or any sort of negative thing which is happening within the body reaction. And it basically has triggers which will primarily be useful for the body to counteract and create those counteract measures which will allow the body to go back to the normal condition. So any negative reactions or mechanisms which are going to be looking at, informing the body that the internal conditions are not stable would be done and communicated throughout the body in terms of the environment through the process of homeostasis, but it is primarily done with the help of what is called the endocrine system. So we look at this particular system because this plays a very vital role in maintaining equilibrium within the body. Now, the two learning outcomes seem to be, quite, small in the sense that it's only got 2. But there's lots of bits to study and cover within the unit. So when we look at the indicative content, when I scroll down to the second page, you would see first we need to understand the level of organization. How is the organism formed? Then we look at the process of homeostasis, and then we go into the main kind of systems. So this part we will study in Learning Outcome 2, these two. But if you see independently, we have to look at understanding, or at least develop a good level of understanding of the different bodies systems. And these include nervous system, digestive system, cardiovascular system, respiratory system, excretory system. So these are 6. And I put the endocrine system along with it. It becomes the 7 systems that we need to look at, obviously studying. Now, when we look at briefly the Moodle and how I would suggest that you need to look at organizing and going about studying this particular unit. So briefly just showing you the Moodle as well, so that you're able to see the contents of this particular unit. So although in my presentations, I'm going to try and be as detailed as possible, for the various systems that we have to cover. But at some stage, what I would expect you to do is, after the bit on discussions within the sessions that we are doing, you at some stage would go back and obviously look at, studying some of these details about the systems via the handouts that I've provided, so that you are able to bring your knowledge up in terms of how these systems work and why they are important and vital for our body. Excuse me. So the first document that you see is the specification of the unit. There is a bit of a workbook which Ascentis is provided. Then the presentations, obviously some part of the learning outcomes, are there's a lot of material to cover. So last time I delivered this, we covered learning outcome 1 in 3 different parts. There are some handouts for major systems that you need to look at. And then the second learning outcome and some of the handouts related, to the aspect of, discussing the second learning outcome. So this is the handout that I've been showing so far. If I close that, this is the workbook which Ascentis has created, and this is available on Moodle. Some part of the presentation and the content in the presentation will come from this particular workbook, which is about 50 pages. But I think this is a must read, because this will provide you the filtered, summarized, and the to-the-point information required to cover this particular unit. And obviously, you would see that some part of these, references to some part of this is going to be also there in the assignment brief. Then we have different systems, and I've looked at some of the best handouts that you can get to be able to understand these systems in a very concise, summarized manner. So these are different handouts which I would suggest that you need to go through and understand, so that you are able to, go into a bit of detail about each of these systems. So there are handouts for nervous system, digestive system. There's a handout for cardiovascular system. There's a handout, for respiratory system. There's a handout primarily for excretory system of the human body, the endocrine system, and then, the process of homeostasis and why it is, important. So these particular handouts, I would suggest that you need to go through, apart from the discussion that we will be having today in the session with regards to the learning outcome. And they would put you into, I would say they would give you good amount of knowledge to be able to confidently cover this particular unit, because this is one of the key units, and one of the reasons why you're looking at doing and studying the nursing qualification in particular is because this is the key unit which most universities want you to have studied before you take up nursing. And this is a graded unit. So again, scoring a higher mark or a merit or a distinction on this unit obviously puts you in good stride when you do apply and make an application towards nursing, at some stage next year in April, May, June timeframe, and that would give you precedence to get into, obviously in the clearing system. Now, if I go into the basics of it, let's start with some of the key terminology to start looking at covering learning outcome 1. And in learning outcome 1, we are looking at the bits which are coming from the indicative content, things like the level of organization. So you'll understand how, various organisms, the cell structure, is within various organisms. We look at the 6 types of, systems that the human body is comprised of. And that would be the essence of covering learning outcome 1. Now, in terms of key terminology, let's start with, understanding what is, cell organization. So when we talk about cell organization, or when we talk about essentially, how our body cells are formed, what we are essentially looking at is the basic components of what forms, I would say, the different organs in our body. So when we say cell organization, what we mean by cell organization is that this is the component level breakup of how cells are arranged and formed in our body, essentially. So when I use the term cell organization, what we are meaning is that how the components of the body's organs, which are made up of cells, are arranged inside the organs. And that is what we mean by cell organization. Now, each cell is essentially called an organelle. So when we talk about the very basic system of, organization of our organs, how they are made, we are essentially talking about, organelles first, which perform a very specific and a vital function within the cell. So when we talk about organelle, it is a specialized subunit within a cell that has a very specific function. Now, if we have to look at, going down into the organization structure of the organelle, then we start with atoms. The basic, what are atoms? Sometimes, when you look at, for example, videos, or, when you look at, say, for example, science videos in particular, what you're going to be seeing is that essentially, most of the organic matter, most of the, life or things in the universe are essentially made up of the smallest particle, which is known to be present. Obviously, atom can also be broken down into smaller particles like neutrinos, protons, but just looking at, not going into too much detail, but at the end of the day, what we want to look at is that when we talk about the smallest known particle, which makes up the chemical component, or which has the chemical elements to be able to sustain or provide life, then we talk about atom. So it's a fundamental particle of matter, if I would put it this way. Sometimes that we see it in Discovery Channel, or some of the other documentaries that you watch. So what is the universe composed of? How is the universe made? Or what are the various components through which various things are made in the universe? So we talk about atom. Atom is the fundamental particle of matter, which basically serves as a building block for all substances, all types of cells that we know. Now, atoms further consist of protons, neutrons, and electrons and neutrinos, and they are further smaller particles which essentially end up making the atom. Now, apart from the atom, what we are also looking at is that we are talking about, molecules. So when we talk about molecules are, slightly bigger components within a lot of atoms when they bound together, or a lot of atoms which are in a particular pattern, say, for example, two or more atoms or groups of atoms, essentially, when they combine together to form a element, or say a substance, then it will be termed, and they are chemically bounded. That means they are all put together as a chemical compound, or for example, a single cell, like a single cell, but within that you'll have a lot of atoms doing different, or coming together to form different parts of the organ or the cell. Then in that case, it will be termed as a molecule. So a molecule tends to be a group of atoms, two or more group of atoms, which could have the same or different elements, and they are chemically bounded. And once we find that as a particle or as a matter, then what we say, these are molecules. Now, two atoms of hydrogen. So when we talk about atom, oxygen, if I talk about component, we all breathe oxygen. So oxygen is made up of, is basically O2. That is the chemical structure of the atom, O2. But when I look at water that we drink, water is made up of hydrogen and oxygen. So they are chemically bounded. So two atoms of hydrogen, H2O, that's the formula. So I don't know how many of you, when I look at, say, atom, so I would say oxygen. Oxygen. And oxygen is O, so it is O2, right? And then when I talk about, say, water, water is basically two atoms or two different groups of atoms bounded together in some sort of a chemical formula, and that is H2O. So that means when I talk about H2O, I mean two molecules of hydrogen are bounded to one molecule of oxygen, and that becomes water. And that is an example of molecule. Now, when we go into, so we have started with the smallest particle, which is present in nature, and that forms everything, which is atom. Atom, for your understanding, can be broken down further into neutrons, protons, and electrons. Atoms, when two or more group of atoms combine together, they form a molecule. So examples of that would be oxygen, if you talk about nitrogen, if you talk about the moment we have carbon emissions, we have carbon monoxide coming out of burning of fossil fuels. So carbon and oxygen, when they combine together in a particular chemical form, compound, 2CO, they become carbon monoxide. But if I say one atom of carbon and two molecules of, or two atoms of oxygen, then it becomes CO2. Then it is carbon dioxide, and that is a molecule. Now, when we go to the third step, that is where when we see the atom and molecules, they combine together in a chemical, through a chemical reaction, they are bounded chemically, and they then start to function as a specific cell, or the cell in that body, in an organ's body or in an organism's body, when they are chemically bounded into atoms and molecules, but they start performing specific functions. So in those cases, we will term them as what is called organelle. That means they become a specific subunit within a particular cell in the body, and that particular cell in the body is actually now performing what is called a specific function, and that specific function would be termed as what is called organelle. Now, when we talk about different specific organelles coming together to essentially form a particular cell or an organ which can work independently, then in those cases, what we will essentially see is that would be termed as a cell. So if I bring that across, because in that obviously the bits are missing. So this would be an example of a cell. Now in this cell, there are lots of different types of atoms and molecules. They are chemically bounded together to form, and they take up specialist functions. These specific functions that they take up tend to become functions like, for example, something like a microtubule. This whole part is a cell. Cell is consisting of organelle. Organelle is further consisted of molecules and atoms. So when we look at centrioles, Golgi body, we look at lysosomes, mitochondria, nucleus, nucleolus, ribosomes, DNA, RNA. These are various specialized organelles which start performing certain type of function within the cell. Now, mitochondria is termed as the energy or the powerhouse of the cell. Lysosomes are basically, chemical, let's say proteins, which basically carry chemicals which are released when something is being digested. Golgi body is like a stomach, because we are talking the very basic component and organization of a cell. We are the most developed organisms on the earth right now. So in our body, the stomach does a specific function, which is digesting the food that we eat. Now in cells, there is a body or a cell called Golgi body, and Golgi body essentially looks at doing the digestive function. So when we talk about various specific types of cells and their functions that these organelles are performing within the cell, then they would be they would basically form the basic building blocks of how these cells essentially work. So Golgi apparatus or Golgi body, as it is called, they are basically packaged proteins, and they are lipid proteins, which essentially would be at some stage destined to be used in the for example body of the cell for the process of producing energy, or in some sort of producing a chemical reaction. Similarly, we go into other types of specialized cells which, when take up different functions within a particular cell structure, they would be termed as cell. Now when we look at going from cell, the next thing that we look at, this different types of cells, when they come together, they then form what is called tissue. So when we talk about tissue, and when we talk about tissue in terms of how it is formed, tissue is basically a group of cells that have a similar function and a structure, and they are brought together to perform a particular function within an organism. And this particular structure, would be something that you would generally see, in the human body or any sort of organism, where you would see a group of these cells working together, having the same chemical structure, and they would be basically taking up a particular function to be able to perform within the organism. And they would be termed as tissues. Now, tissues can be of many different types. We are not going to go into detail, but tissues, for example, can be connective tissue, epithelial tissue, muscle tissue, nervous tissue, and they have different types of functions. So when you look at your muscles, when somebody pulls your cheek, or somebody looks at flexing their biceps or triceps, basically what is happening in those cases, your muscles are flexing, and that is a particular type of tissue which is able to expand and contract depending on how you're exercising and things like that. So similarly, nervous tissues have a specific function. They have neurons within them, and they have the chemical reactions typically happen, which allows messages or commands to be transmitted from the central nervous system using the purposes of nervous tissue. Then you have connective tissue, which primarily looks at providing support to different parts and organs of the body, and it connects the different parts. So connective tissue, one such example that I'll give you, and I think most of you should be able to relate to, is when you bend your knees. And when we do see our parents or people, elderly people, they say, I have pain in my knees. So what is happening is that when we talk about arthritis, or when we talk about problems in terms when people have pain within their bones, or when they use or do some certain type of functions, they experience pain, is because the connective tissue between, or cartilage as we call it, has become thin, and that is where the rubbing of the bones basically causes that particular pain, and that is called arthritis. So connective tissues are present between, if I put it this way, which are present between when we look at our joints, and the joints are flexible. So when you look at your ankle, you look at your elbow, you look at your fingers, you look at your knee, you look at parts of your body which can flex, neck, for example, your back, you would generally see connective tissues present in those cases, and they would be tissues which are, closely linking the bones, cartilage, and the blood, and they perform diverse functions to be able to, allow the body to function. Then the last type of tissue that we talk about is epithelial tissue. So epithelial tissue is tissue which basically covers the surface of the body, of the cells, or tissues in terms of organs. So when we talk about epithelial layer, well, normally if I peel the skin off, sometimes when you have burns, you have one of your layers of your skin which gets burned, and it basically then becomes vulnerable to infections, because your primary layer which basically protects your skin is the epithelial layer, which is the outer layer of the of the tissue, and this layer basically tends to be the skin in most cases when we talk about human systems or human body systems. So when you look at digestive tract, there is a epithelial layer. When you look at respiratory cavity, our lungs and our the trachea and the windpipe, they are encased within a particular kind of covering, and that epithelial covering would be basically the epithelial tissue which separates it from other parts and organs of the body. So when we talk about cardiovascular cavity or cardiothoracic cavity, which means your lungs, your trachea, your food pipe, your heart, they are in a particular cavity in your body, and that is separate from your respiratory and digestive system, which are in a different kind of cavity. So when I use the word cavity, what I mean by that is there are different spaces, and these spaces are all surrounded by what is called an epithelial tissue, which is a tissue which can stretch, which can connect, which can, using the process of osmosis, transfer goods or nutrients from one to the other, but it creates a physical barrier or a protective barrier, not a physical, I would put it this way, yes, physical, but a protective barrier around a body or an organ of our body, and that serves as let's put it this way, serves as a protective barrier or a barrier which physically separates our organs from one from the other. And this lining, which basically encapsulates, if I put it this way, the organ, would be essentially the epithelial tissue. So they are able to still allow interactions between different organs to happen, but they still keep it secure or form a protective layer around that organ, and that would be the sense of tissues. So in terms of tissues, and if we talk about, say, for example, if I look at bringing across, say, an example of different types of tissue, these would be different types of tissues that I would suggest, which I'm talking about, which is connective tissue, epithelial tissue, muscle tissue, and nervous tissue. And they would be generally the group of cells which primarily, do or perform similar functions. And these similar functions then allow the body to function as, the organs in the body to essentially function. Now, we also then talk about after tissues, the next bigger organization tends to be an organ. And that organ is a group of different tissues that work together to perform a specific function. So when we talk about an organ, and when we in general talk about a particular type of organ in the human body, what we are looking at is a collection of tissues that are structurally formed to work as a specialized unit. And that specialized unit can perform a very particular function. And they could be things like heart, kidneys, lungs, and they are examples of organs. You have excretory system, you have a liver, for example, you have your kidney, you have, say, for example, spleen, pancreas, you have thyroid. These are all organs in your body, and they are basically made up of tissues. So organ tends to be a specialized structure which is composed of two or more tissues that have evolved to perform a very specific function within a living organism. And in the context of human body, these organs would be organs that we talk about like liver, pancreas, spleen, kidney, our adrenal glands, your stomach, your small intestine, your gallbladder, your abdomen, your lungs. These are all heart, for example. These are all different brain. These are all different organs which have now come together through the, two or more tissues which have worked, fused together to primarily, form this organ. Now, when we talk about an organ, and when we do talk about, say, organ system, so let's look at, for example, when I say a particular example of organ, I would put it this way, which everybody can relate to, and I'll put this here as a picture, which basically is an example of an organ, which is heart. Now, these organs don't function independently. So what we need to look at now is an organ system, right? What are the different types of organs which actually form different systems within the human body? So when sticking to, say, for example, a particular type of organ, and some type of organs work together as a system to be able to perform a function within the human body. So there are 12 different organ systems in the human body. First, if at any given point in time anybody is to ask you a question that how many organ systems are there within a human body, there are 12 organ systems in the human body. Now, what are these? These are the 12 organ systems that we generally see between male females. So you have the integumentary, skeletal, muscular, nervous, endocrine, cardiovascular, lymphatic, respiratory, digestive, urinary, and reproductive systems. So these are 12 systems that you would generally see which are present within the human body. Now, out of these, we are going to be focusing on these systems which are essentially, as per our indicative content, required for us to, have knowledge about in terms of aspects of human physiology. We are not going to be looking at some systems in particular because of the fact that they are not, part of the indicative content. So these 6 in particular are the ones. So we've looked at endocrine, we've looked at nervous system, we've looked at digestive system, we've looked at cardiovascular, we will look at, respiratory system, and the excretory system or urinary system, excretory system. So these are the 12 different systems that we are going to be looking at. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So the excretory system is what I missed out. So excretory system. we are going to be looking at seven of them in particular, including the endocrine, and these are different systems that we look at when we talk about the human body. Now, just looking at very briefly an example of different types of systems. So obviously there are lots of them, but what I would want to do is basically using a diagram, essentially show you a particular snapshot of different types of systems that we can look at, in the human body. Now, because we're talking about organ systems, so if I just look at one in particular, if I go into a bit more detail and talk about one in particular, we are looking at different types of organ systems that the human body consists of. Now, if I look at just expanding one and look at one in particular, say, look at muscular system. Now, muscular system would be basically consisting of, skeletal muscles, tendons, cartilage, and, they would be generally based over the bones. And that is where you would see some of these organs working together to look at working as a system. Now, I'll also put a better picture across in terms of, talking about different types of organs, because the idea of looking at different types of systems here is to understand what are the different organs which essentially, comprise or make up these particular, systems. So if I let me put across a particular picture or a diagram which essentially shows a particular type of system in detail, but also shows the number of organs which essentially make up a particular type of system. Now, if I go into details of organ systems, that means there are different types of organs which are going to work together to be able to perform a specialized function within the human body. And they would be a group of organs that can work together and then perform a specific function. So, for example, when we look at digestive system, just as an example, we would see that digestive system typically, would comprise of a number of different types of organs. This one I want to take as an example because I think we should be able to relate to it. It's simple enough for us to be able to relate. Now, digestive system would consist of things like when you start putting food in your mouth. So imagine and think and put on your thinking hats right now. So how do you eat food? Your body, in the body, there are some chemical reactions which happen. They trigger a reaction to your brain. The brain then, obviously starts secreting certain chemicals through passing that signal on to central nervous system. And within your body's organs, essentially, not organism, organs, essentially, you would generally see that certain chemical reactions start to occur. And these reactions, release of certain of these chemicals in the body, then triggers a reaction to your brain to say, I am hungry, or you are hungry and you want, the body then starts, kind of preparing to receive food. So the first thing that typically happens is when you put food in your oral cavity, or which is called your mouth, you would generally see your tongue starts secreting saliva. The saliva which comes into production from your body starts increasing when you're actually eating food, because it needs to make the food moist. And that moist food mixed with saliva becomes moist, and that becomes easy for the person to swallow the food down through the food pipe. So oral cavity, your saliva secretion increases, the food that we eat goes into the food pipe, and then finally enters what is called the stomach. Now here further chemicals are released which basically break the food down, and along with the stomach you have pancreas, which release pancreatic juice through the pancreatic duct, which is other chemicals which are released. Liver releases bile, which is through the bile duct, and that is also going to help in digestion of the food. Then there are certain other organs, well, I'm not going into detail, but say, for example, gallbladder, duodenum, and spleen, they would release certain chemicals that would help in the digestion of food. It will be broken down into smaller parts. At some stage, then the food will enter what is called the small intestine in this case. And from the small intestine, it will go into the large intestine. And finally, the food, all the nutrients which are important for the body to be absorbed, things like proteins, vitamins, fat, anything which is important for the body for it to be able to produce energy or use it for future uses, is all extracted. And at some stage, the waste products are excreted through your rectum. It gets collected in rectum, and finally we excrete that out through the anus. Now, all this is a part of what is called the digestive system. There are so many different organs which are working together to help your body digest food. It starts with the salivary gland, the oral cavity, the food pipe. You look at liver, pancreas, gallbladder, duodenum. You look at small intestine, large intestine, rectum, anus, and colon, which is your, basically the pipe through which the food actually travels. Food pipe is called the esophagus. And then you have your tongue, which plays an important role. You have pharynx, you have salivary glands. So if you look at, there are 13 different organs which essentially make up what is called the digestive system. And if any of this malfunctions, you're not going to be able to digest food properly or in a way wherein, it is required to be absorbed in your body. So when we talk about organs, and when a number of organs come together to work and perform a specific function in the human body, they would be termed as what are called organ systems. Now, the last bit is when you have complex organ systems like these, which are present in the human body and different forms of, mammals or other forms of life on Earth, they might have certain types of organ systems. Now, it might not be necessary that all the organisms have all the types of organ systems which are seen in a complex organism or the most developed organism on Earth, which is humans. You might have birds which have certain type of systems. You might have reptiles having certain types of systems. Amphibious animals like frogs, they're having different types of systems. And some of these might not be present, some of these might be present, but human body has the most complex structure. So obviously, when these organs come together and they form an organ system, at some stage, these various organ systems work together to, perform different functions in the particular body of the organism, and they would be then helping to form what is called an organism altogether, which means a human body. So an individual living entity which is able to perform independently all its functions using various organ systems made up of organs, made up of tissues, made up of cells, organelle, would be then termed as what is called an organism. Now, this would essentially help understand how the organization or cellular structure of the organisms or cell structure or organization of the organism typically happens or develops over a period of time. So the humans have developed over millions of years. We only had the basics types of cells on Earth when we talk about single-celled organisms like the amoeba and say for example amoeba and bacteria and stuff. Over a point in time, some of these organisms developed further, and we have these different kingdoms or different types of let's say animal systems which we talk about, and they typically tend to be because as the time has evolved, the different types of systems and organisms have evolved, and humans have come from mammals, so obviously we are a part of mammalia, but there are different types of organisms which have lived the earth, and obviously some of them over millions and millions of years have developed into what is called the humans. So when we talk about the animal classification, that is where we talk about different types of these developments which have happened over the years, and we talk about, say for example, vertebrates and invertebrates, organisms which do not have any skeletal system or bones. So invertebrates, vertebrates, basically, which is where you normally have the basic classification that they have soft bodies and hard bodies or body tissues which form bones. Then we have carnivores, herbivores, and omnivores in terms of different types of food eating habits and what they can eat and do not eat. And at some stage, then we talk about, the classification which goes further into, different kinds of systems of animal groups. So we talk about, animals which have a backbone, they would be termed as vertebrates. So when we talk about anything which has a backbone or a spine, essentially would be termed as, vertebrate. Now, for those of you who are interested probably in going in further details in terms of understanding the different forms of animal classification. I would suggest it's like a bit of a back to school session. And there is one website which I would recommend that you look at, which is the BBC Bite Size website. Now, this particular website would basically break things down into very, very simple aspects. So you would see where and how different, animal systems have, originated. So we see insects going into, the amphibians, then going into fishes, then going into amphibians, going into reptiles, going into birds, then into mammals, and finally leading to the development of humans. And these are defined, or you can basically go through them from the purposes of looking at short videos which they have created, and they are quite useful. So this would be some additional reading that I would suggest that you need to do to understand cellular organization, animal system classification, and to bring up your knowledge. This is, I think, we all remember that we've studied this in biology up until our, year 10 or year 11. And this is to do by looking at, going through some of the bits on the BBC Bite website. So key terminology part of it, we want to cover levels of organization. And level of organization starts with the basic atom, basic particle, which makes up matter on Earth in the universe, which is starting with atom, groups of atom grouped together, two or more different groups of atom grouped together, forming and doing a function, become a molecule. Two or more specialized types of molecules, again chemically bound together to carry out a specific function, become an organelle. An organelle would again be a smallest unit of living organism. When we talk about organelle, we talk about bacteria, we talk about, viruses, we talk about fungi. These are the smallest specialized subunits which can live independently because they have within their body structure, different types of cells or molecules which are able to perform functions like, powerhouse of the cell, mitochondria, digestive system, which is the Golgi apparatus, things like that, microtubule. Then cells going into becoming tissues, which are grouping together of different types of cells, different tissues, when they are organized into, different types of tissues, when they are organized into performing a specific function, then become an organ. Different types of organs working together to perform a specific function within an organism, like excretion, like respiration, like breathing. They would form an organ system, and number of organ systems when put together form an organism. Is this bit clear? Any questions on this so far? Okay. Now, what I've also done is I've shortlisted a few videos that you could look at by watching, and they would kind of give you an overview of each of these systems. So this is a video link that I put up here. If I quickly show this to you, you have to watch this offline, but these bits would be essentially useful because they would help you understand, using a video rather than having to read 30, 40 pages. What you'll be able to do is essentially look at reading or watching a particular video, and that would essentially help you understand, a particular type of system. So if I look at nervous system, this is a particular video which presents the human body nervous system, in about 9 minutes. So in about a 9-minute video, this particular video will essentially help you understand what is the human body nervous system. And very good video, very precise, and it goes into details of, when you read the accompanying handout which I've provided on Moodle. That handout will be useful after you have watched this particular video, because you will at least be familiarized with all the major components of the nervous system. And at some stage, going and reading that further would make it, absolutely clear in terms of how the human nervous system functions, what it consists of, what are the organs involved in the nervous system, and what are the key functions which these organs actually perform to help our body essentially work as an integrated unit. So when you decide that I want to raise my hand, there's a signal or a command which goes straight away from your brain to the central peripheral system, then to the muscular tissues in your hand. And this happens in micro milliseconds, and you're able to raise your hand straight away. You want to, say, for example, do something that requires the commands to travel from your brain, signals to travel from your brain to the various parts of the body, and they all happen in microseconds, and they would be all done through the use of through the central nervous system and the nervous system in particular, and that would be explained in this particular video.
Most of us call it. What makes this organ unique is that within it lies the ability for humans to know oneself. This feature distinguishes and sets the human species apart from the rest of creation. This ability is known as consciousness or intelligence.
So it will break down, and I think this video is going to be quite informative. So similarly, what I've done is when I look at the different systems that we are going to be studying, in this particular unit, there are videos that I've, shortlisted for each of these systems, which are going to define, and give you very good, precise knowledge about what the system is, what organs it consists of, how they work together, what are the functions they carry out, and why is it, one of the important systems that you need to know when we talk about human physiology. So nervous system, a clear depiction of what the nervous system consists of. It consists of central and peripheral nervous systems. Obviously, the peripheral nervous system has these many, different organs working together, and the central nervous system or sympathetic nervous system, basically CNS and PNS as they are called, broken down further. Nervous system is broken down into two different types. So they are essentially using these many organs to essentially help the body and body functions to work when you decide on doing something. For example, you want to stand up and start walking, then the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system work together to be able to let this command go across to the muscle tissues in your legs, and essentially allows you to then start walking. And then it is explained using a video. Then we go into digestive system. Digestive system has these many organs which are working together, and they form of what is called the digestive system. Again, a video that is shortlisted here, which basically is a good video, describing the functioning of the digestive system. Visually, you're having to see this, and that visual, means of looking at how this system actually works is going to be through this particular video that I would suggest that you need to look at watching. And again, this is some of the videos, they range from 3 minutes to 5 minutes to 9 minutes. But just generally speaking, these videos are handpicked, and the reason of picking up these videos is that they will provide you concise information, which is not just related to understanding the system, but also to the fact that they are related to the indicative content of this unit and what we want to understand in these systems. So just let's briefly listen in for a few seconds on the digestive system.
On average, between 1 and 2.7 kilograms of food a day. That's over 365 kilograms a year per person, and more than 28,800 kilograms over the course of a lifetime. And every last scrap makes its way through the digestive system. Comprised of 10 organs, covering 9 meters, and containing over 20 specialized cell types, this is one of the most diverse and complicated systems in the human body. It's part.
So I didn't know when I looked at this particular video, because on an average, a human eats about 30,000 kgs of food in their lifetime, and everything is digested, or everything is taken into through the digestive system. So this video is going to give you some knowledge, obviously, about some basic facts about what the digestive system does, and also at the same time, this will also be useful for you to watch and understand how these 9 or 10 different organs essentially come together. So when we look at these in particular, they would give you a good idea about what the digestive system is all about. So we start with the, say for example, the spleen, the stomach, the gallbladder, the liver, the pancreas. You talk about the intestines, the rectum, the anus, and the stomach in particular. They all will be the various types of organs which will form the digestive system. Then we have cardiovascular system. Again, this particular system, is basically, what is cardiovascular system? Cardiovascular system, basically, when we talk about the heart, when we talk about the circulation of blood, when we talk about, say, for example, the exchange of oxygen which happens between the lungs and the alveoli of the lungs, microtubules of the lungs, and when you breathe out carbon dioxide and you take in the oxygen, the exchange of oxygen typically, or the carrying of oxygens by the red blood cells in our body to all parts of the body to basically help the tissue and cells perform their function, is all basically done through the cardiovascular system. So cardiovascular system is a system which provides blood supply throughout the body, and blood has, as we have seen in the infectious diseases unit that we studied the different types of cells. So red blood cells, white blood cells, platelets, and white blood cells are also termed as leukocytes. But when we specifically focus on RBCs, red blood cells, they are the cells which are responsible for carrying oxygen in the body. So the cardiovascular system essentially is a system which provides blood supply, the blood part of the supply of the blood to all organs of the body when it responds to any sort of stimuli or any sort of reaction which happens in the body, and the blood gets transmits the signal to different organs and different organ systems within the body. So this particular system consists of or performs a very important function in the human body, because without the flow of blood and without the flow of nutrients, all the other organs in the human body would cease to function. So the cardiovascular system, as we talk about, consists of heart, arteries, veins, and capillaries. So you see the heart pumping out blood, and receiving and purifying the blood, but the purification of blood typically happens, by the exchange of oxygen, and the oxygen leaving the one part of the heart, and impure blood leaving one part of the heart, coming back from the body, and then the pure blood being pumped out by the heart. So heart is an organ, and it's one of the most important organs in the body, which is a part of the cardiovascular system. Arteries and veins. So arteries carry pure blood, veins carry impure blood, which is being sent back into the heart for purification. And then capillaries are the network of blood vessels, which basically take nerve endings to all parts of the body, and which is where they branch out into veins branch out into what are called capillaries, and these capillaries essentially would carry blood to every part of every nook and corner, every part of the human body. So when we talk about cardiovascular system, these are the four most important components. And when we look at what are the key functions of cardiovascular system, one of the key function of cardiovascular system is to circulate oxygen and remove carbon dioxide from the body. And that happens by the process of osmosis, or essentially the exchange of oxygen, which happens from between the red blood cells and the various other cells within the body. And that is a detailed process in altogether. And when you read the handout which is given on Moodle on the cardiovascular system, there are bits and pieces that you will get to see and understand how the exchange of oxygen helps in purification, and carrying energy and all the other types of nutrients, which is done by the red blood cells, or the blood system, or the blood essentially, which is a part of the cardiovascular system in the body. The cardiovascular system is also responsible for providing cells with the nutrient. So when we finally eat, everything gets absorbed into our blood. Sugar that you get, or anything which is sugary, or anything which is fructose and glucose, gets absorbed in the blood immediately. And the blood essentially then transmits, or essentially transfers, nutrients to all body cells in all parts of the body cell, or all parts to the human body. And that typically is again through the flow of blood within the human body. It also removes waste products of the metabolism, which are basically products which then get excreted out. So if anything which is waste as per the human body, or as per the digestive system, things which cannot be absorbed, and or nutrients from the substance have been absorbed into the human body, which are useful, but anything which is not useful is then excreted. So that traveling typically happens through the excretory system, and again leads to disposal of waste from the human body, is again a part and function wherein cardiovascular system plays its part. the filtration part of it, the absorption part of it happens within the cardiovascular system, but the physical part of the process in terms of absorption of these nutrients and excreting the waste out happens in the excretory system. Then the body is protected against any sort of injury and infection and disease, and that is also done by the cardiovascular system. So blood clots which get created after a person gets injured or when you have a cut essentially are ways and means through which infection, or the body essentially, when I say body, I mean cardiovascular system, essentially is looking at stopping the spread of any disease or infection by creating an outer layer or covering to seal the wound. And that is primarily done through the process of clotting, and that is where you would get to see the cardiovascular systems comes into play to be able to help the human body function, and all the other organs get oxygen within the human body. Again, there is a video which basically describes the cardiovascular system visually that you get to see. Excuse me. So when you get to see, that is primarily because although I can explain the cardiovascular system using a diagram, but some of these things, when you see it moving through a video, would be more useful because they give you a sense of perspective in terms of how the cardiovascular system actually works. So when we talk about the working of the cardiovascular system and you see actual workings of it, this particular video that I've shortlisted, essentially would be useful for you to again watch, because this would provide you a clear example of how the system actually works within the human body. So a brief listen into this particular video, which I would suggest that you need to watch in order to understand how the cardiovascular system works. So let's listen. And this is a 6-minute video, which basically...
The cardiovascular system is part of the circulatory system that circulates blood. The circulatory system also includes the lymphatic system, which circulates lymph. But the terms circulatory system and cardiovascular system are commonly used interchangeably to describe blood circulation.
So this particular video, because of copyrights, I cannot play this on our session. So what you would be required to do is watch it offline, and that would give you the details of, cardiovascular system. Then, any questions on this so far? Okay, the next one that we are, okay, thank you. The next one that we are looking at is briefly the respiratory system. The respiratory system consists of, lots of different body parts. So if you think again here, without looking at the diagram, just close your eyes and put on your thinking hats, and you think, how do you breathe? What are the various organs which are involved in breathing? So I've closed my eyes and I'm thinking now, when I'm talking, obviously I'm talking, but I'm simultaneously breathing. But how is the breathing happening? So my mouth is open, my air that I'm inhaling is going through my nose or my nasal cavity. Then while I'm still talking, the air enters through the windpipe, going into through my neck, and then going into my thoracic cavity, which is the cavity which has the lungs. Now, while I'm talking, because I'm talking simultaneously and I'm also breathing, my mouth is also open. So sometimes I'm exhaling or inhaling. So the process of taking in air is inhaling, and the process of bringing air out or carbon dioxide out from your body is exhaling. So my mouth is open because I'm talking. I'm currently inhaling through the nose, but I'm exhaling some part of the air through the mouth. So this process through which the air enters my body, and what are the organs it is using? So I'm using my mouth, I'm using my nose, I'm using my windpipe, and then I'm using my lungs. And then when in the lungs, the air is going in, it is using the various components or various molecular structure of the lungs help in the exchange of oxygen versus carbon dioxide. The red blood cells are absorbing the oxygen, at the same time they are giving out carbon monoxide, and that is that is something which I'm breathing out from my mouth, or essentially from my nose. And this particular process through which my nose, mouth, throat, voice box, which is your larynx, your windpipe, and your lungs is helping me to breathe in and breathe out, basically consists of the respiratory system. Now, if I go into details of it, obviously, when I say nose is formed up of nasal cavity, there are nasal conchae, and there are nasal vestibules. That means within your nose itself, the cartilage that you see, which is the cartilage which you flex sometimes, that you pinch your nose, or you squeeze your nose, you see, that is the cartilage which is covering your nose, and that particular part, along with the bone inside your nose and the cavity which it creates, the area through which the air actually passes, would be the nose itself. But it has three basic components in it. Then we talk about larynx, which is called the voice box. Now, there is an epiglottis, or a tissue in your just underneath your tonsils, or underneath, just where you normally have your Adam's apple. You would normally have a soft tissue there, which basically acts like a flap. So when you eat food, it actually closes the windpipe, and the food actually flows into the food pipe. Now, when you breathe, what it does is it closes the food pipe, and the air actually goes into the windpipe. So esophagus, or the trachea as we call it. The esophagus is the food pipe. The biological term is esophagus. And when we talk about the windpipe, it is the trachea. The biological term is trachea. So windpipe and food pipe, there is a tissue between the two which basically acts like a flap. So when I drink water, the windpipe closes. This tissue epiglottis actually closes the windpipe so that water does not go into the lungs, and it goes into the food pipe or the esophagus. Similarly, when I'm breathing, the esophagus gets closed, and the air that I'm breathing in actually goes into the lungs or the trachea, and through which the exchange of oxygen and carbon monoxide or carbon dioxide happens, and that is what we breathe out. So these are individual, obviously, detailings of individual organs, and the organ structure that they form is basically larynx. Then you have trachea. Then you have the lungs. Lungs are made up of, obviously, alveoli and bronchi and various cutaneous parts of the lung, which basically help in the exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide in the body, are within the lungs. So they are like a branching network. And you have two lungs in your body, so left and the right lung. Then apart from that, you also have the respiration happens in conjunction with the cardiovascular system or the circulatory system, because the actual exchange of oxygen and carrying of oxygen in the human body is done by the red blood cells. So the red blood cells bind with the hemoglobin in the red blood cells binds with the oxygen, and it carries the oxygen to all parts of the body, because the blood flows to the all different parts of the body, and all the organs actually require oxygen to create energy, or essentially do or carry out their functions. And the carbon dioxide, or the waste, which is carbon monoxide, is carried back by the veins in the blood, in the cardiovascular system, which is the veins, and they then carry the blood to the heart, from which it is purified, and the oxygen, the waste product, which is carbon dioxide or carbon monoxide, gets actually excreted out through the nasal cavity. Now, some systems would work together with other systems in order for the body to be able to perform its functions. So here, when we talk about the respiratory system, we'll be looking at, also talking about the respiratory system working together with the cardiovascular system, and that would be something that you would also have to, look at. So the video essentially will explain first what is a respiratory system, and then at some stage, then go into the details of how the respiratory systems works with the cardiovascular system to, help in the exchange of oxygen within the body. So again, there's a detailed video, which is about a 9-minute video, and this video will explain, how the respiratory system functions, and then the other system it works very closely with to help in the complex operation of exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide in the body typically is, a combination of systems working together to help us breathe, to help us survive, because our body and our organs constantly need oxygen. We need to breathe that in, but there are other systems which are involved, which primarily help in the exchange of oxygen within at the micro, at the cellular level. And this particular thing is accomplished by 4 different types of systems working together. So when we look at, if I take a long breath, you're not able to see me, but if you hear, sometimes when you go to your GP and your doctor, and what it does is, if they put a stethoscope in the back of your chest, and they want you to take long or deep breaths. So what you can feel is that in order to normally, when you're breathing, you don't see your, thoracic cavity or your lungs expanding. But if I take a deep breath, what generally happens is you would see your chest swelling up. That means there is more oxygen that you're taking in, and that allows the GP to actually hear or essentially sense whether your lungs are infected or not by putting a stethoscope in. So what I'm trying to say as a point here is, when you take deep breaths, your muscular system, which is the muscles or the tissue around your lungs, is also expanding to allow your body to take in more air. So the respiratory system functions very closely with the muscular system as well. So when sometimes we are exercising, when we are at gym, your body is requiring more oxygen. So your breathing increases, your heart rate increases, your heartbeat increases, because your body is creating more of carbon dioxide, and it needs to be pumped out as quickly as possible. So that, and fresh oxygen is required for the body's cells to be able to replenish and burn, energy, to essentially burn fat and, sugars to be able to produce energy. So in those cases, your circulatory system is also working with your respiratory system. And because you're gymming and you're exercising, maybe you're on the treadmill, or you're maybe on some sort of, you're doing weights and things like that, your muscles and your skeleton system, which is your bones, are also expanding and contracting. So that is where, your skeleton system also starts working. Now, all this is being controlled through your nervous system, because how does your body or your body organs tell you or your brain in general that because you're consuming more energy, and your body needs more energy because you're exercising, and in order to get that energy, the cells need to burn, fat. And in those cases, to burn the fat or convert fat and glucose into sugars, which can be then absorbed in the bloodstream, can only happen when the nervous system puts that message out to your body to say, okay, start increasing your activity. So the cardiovascular system starts, your heartbeat starts to go up, your cardiovascular system goes into an overdrive to meet the requirements of the body in terms of exchange of oxygen. Respiratory system, you're breathing in more oxygen, your breathing capacity increases, or your rate at which you breathe also keeps increasing. You're flexing your muscles, so your skeleton system and muscular systems are coming into play. So you would see that here in this particular video, this person would cover not just the respiratory system, but in order to explain how the respiratory system works, they would be looking at, explaining how this particular system works with other systems as well, to be able to help your body cope with that increased demand of oxygen, which is required to burn fat, to create energy, which is required for the cells or your body to respond. And that would be done through the respiratory system working in conjunction with other systems in your body to meet that particular demand. So let's listen in very briefly to this video. This video is again going to be important for you to understand the respiratory system in detail.
At all times is the respiratory system. Every couple of seconds, we breathe in air from the atmosphere and then breathe out. This is to supply every cell in our bodies with one particular component of the atmosphere, oxygen. Our cells need oxygen to perform cellular respiration, which generates the energy we use to think and move around. Without oxygen, we can't produce energy. We don't last very long. So how exactly does the respiratory system work? Let's take a closer look now.
So this video will explain that to you in detail. And I would suggest that you need to look at, watching this video and then going into the handout, which I provided on Moodle, to be able to get into details of what he's explaining in the video. The next system that we talk about is the excretory system. This is a system which comprises of kidneys, the ureters, the urinary bladder, and the urethra. And this system is responsible for removing any waste products which are produced or because of the cellular metabolism which happens in our cells, organs, tissues, cells, tissues, organs, and organ systems. This system also helps in maintaining the pH balance in our body. So sometimes what happens is when you are drained, you use the word, I'm feeling quite drained, and you're feeling quite lethargic, you're sweating quite a lot. So what happens is these are activities or your body giving you signals after you've done certain activities. So for example, if you've run 3 kilometers or, you've done a bit of gymming, your body feels a bit lethargic and you feel a bit lazy, then what you're basically sensing and your body telling you is that the body needs to maintain or go back to its equilibrium level of maintaining salts in your body. And the salts in your body could be that you maybe have a Lucozade, or you come in and have an energy drink, or in some cases you have lemon water, or you just have water to basically replenish some part of the body's function, because you have a glass of orange juice or something like that, and that gives you instant energy. Now, that also is restoring what is called the salts in your body. So sometimes when we have certain types of illness or disease like diarrhea, when your body loses a lot of nutrients and the pH balance gets disturbed, so what the doctor normally prescribes is for you to have a certain type of solution, or a let's say oral solution, which allows you to restore the pH or the salts in your body, salt water balance in your body. And that is all done through the excretory system. So the excretory system is also responsible for excreting or taking out toxins from your body. Now, when you do exercise, when you feel hot, or for example, when you are essentially, say, in a hot and humid climate, you are sweating quite a lot. Now, what is your body doing in that case? The body is essentially, which is your skin, is trying to maintain your body temperature. And how does it maintain body temperature? It basically creates or starts excreting sweat. That means the sweat that you get on your skin is going to calm your pull your temperature down of your skin, because you're directly exposed to the sun, or maybe in some cases the physical activity that you're doing is causing your body temperature to rise. And in order for your body temperature to be brought down, your body uses what is called sweat to decrease your body temperature. And that also happens through the excretory system. That means your body is essentially looking at reducing, using natural mechanism to reduce heat heat dissipation from your body. And that heat dissipation which is happening, sometimes you touch somebody and say, you're quite hot. And the reason why they are quite hot is because they have been either exposed to direct sunlight, or in some cases, the body is essentially, carrying out physical activity, which basically is, making, and obviously the temperature of the body is rising. So in such cases, what you're going to be looking at is looking into the excretory system in detail. And again, there's a video for this, which I've got. This video, along with the handout that you would look at, would essentially help you to understand this particular system in a bit more detail. Again, this video is an 8-minute video, which I would suggest that you need to watch. And then after the watching of the video, what I would suggest is you essentially then read the handout, which is given to go into detailing of what the system, what this video is explaining, and what are the various organs which are consisting and making the human excretory system. So let's listen in very briefly to this particular video.
Excretory system. The excretory system consists of a pair of kidneys, a pair of ureters, a urinary bladder, and urethra. The nitrogenous end product in man is urea. Kidney is the bean-shaped, red-colored organ.
So one of the things which I will stop it here, one of the things that you look at is when we go out and pee, essentially your body is able to excrete, solid components not put components, but matter which basically gets excreted as solids is normally excreted out as poo. But when you look at excess water, toxic chemicals, or any sort of chemical reaction which has happened and that needs to be excreted of the body, is normally done through the process wherein you go and do urination, as we call it. And urination typically, when you look at the analysis of urine, sometimes when you go to GPs and you have, for example, you're showing certain types of illness, the GP would then recommend getting, apart from the blood test, asking you to get urine test done or stool test done. So in those cases, these tests would establish what is wrong with the human body. So when we look at urination and specifically the process through which your urine is essentially tested, the main component in the urine tends to be urea, which the human body actually excretes. So you will look at this particular video and it will explain what are the various organs which make up the excretory system, which are kidneys. You're looking at gallbladder, you're looking at adrenal glands, you're looking at ureters, and you're looking at urethra, which will essentially be a part and parcel of the excretory system. Now, the last system that we want to look at, just to give you a bit of sense of coverage in terms of the 7 systems, is the endocrine system. Now, the endocrine system essentially is a complex network of glands and organs. Now, this system is also very important because it controls hormones in the human body, depending on whether you're a male or a female. And your hormone secretion and the control of the release of hormones in your body to maintain the body metabolism, the pH balance or the salt water balance and the energy levels, and also helping with the reproductive function in the human body, specifically looking at when we look at children. So the human body growth and development is all associated with, the endocrine system. So when we are young, we do see that human bodies are growing. They're in the growth phase, and you normally see, boys and girls growing up to the age of 14, 16, wherein you will see expansion in the muscles. There will generally be expansion in the skeleton system, which will lead to gains in height. You might at some stage in the later stages of your life also gain weight, or maybe, even during teenage, if your food habits or other bits, are slightly different, or, if your consumption is slightly higher, you could probably end up gaining weight. And in order to maintain the balance in the body, hormones do play the most important function of creating this balance within the human body in terms of how organ systems work. So when we talk about the endocrine system essentially, is a system which basically looks at, the secretion of, our, let's say, the hormones, and at the same time, it regulates the biological processes in the human body from conception to the adulthood stage. So when I say this, what I mean by that essentially is that when we talk about the various different, parts of the endocrine system and different organs, what we are basically working and talking about is that this system consists of glands which actually produce and release hormones. Now, these hormones are termed as what are called chemical messengers that regulate various body functions. So, in some cases, some of these, organs which comprise, let me put it this way, the endocrine system comprise of, glands like thyroid. They look at, parathyroid, pituitary. Then we look at the pineal body gland. We look at, when we then differentiate between human body as males and human bodies as females, there are components of this gland which are seen as different manifestation in different, humans. So when we talk about females, we talk about ovaries, we talk about fallopian tubes, and we talk about, say, for example, in males, we talk about testicles, and we talk about the penis in particular. They tend to also differentiate the various types of organs which are there in males and females. So essentially, when we look at the endocrine system will comprise of different glands. They can vary, some of these glands can vary when you talk about males and females. And these glands essentially are responsible, and for responsible, when I say is they are responsible for producing and releasing hormones. Hormones are nothing but chemical messengers, and these chemical messengers or stimuli essentially would regulate all biological processes within the human body. And they would be controlling these biological processes from the time of conception to the time when your human body is growing, as a teenager, as a child, as an infant, from child to basically a teenager to an adult, and into your old age. So the secretion of these hormones, which are chemical messengers, would essentially be looking at interacting with some of the other systems in your body, like the brain and the nervous system, and they would then regulate growth and various other functions in the human body. Functions like metabolism, digestion, for example, reproductive systems, or the process of, regulation of some of these functions through the hormones which are released or secreted by various organs involved in the endocrine system, would then be very important to understand nearly every aspect of the human physiology, including things like when I talk about, I'm having some mood swings, or for example, I'm not feeling good. Or in some cases, when we say, I'm feeling a bit lethargic, or I'm feeling a bit lazy, or I'm feeling, when we look at these mood regulation kind of, signals, this is something which your body is essentially, showing, or, essentially, these are things which are being controlled by the release of hormones in your body, and that is overall essentially under the control of what is called the endocrine system. So when we talk about mood swings, when we talk about growth and development, when we talk about different metabolic processes, they would all be related to your endocrine system. So how do you know that your body is sometimes you say, I'm feeling hungry now. You just had dinner. Or sometimes, as parents, we say, you've just had food, you've just had lunch. How are you feeling hungry? But your body is still telling you that, you need more energy, or you need more nutrients. And that is the, function of the endocrine system, wherein it is still telling you that, okay, no, what I need to do is, because there are hormones being secreted in your body, what that they are telling your body and your system, the central nervous system in general, is that you need more food, or you need to regulate or increase your metabolism, and that would be primarily where the process of eating more food. So when we talk about the endocrine system, again, male and female endocrine systems might be slightly different, which are mostly related to the reproductive organs when the differentiation comes, but generally things like pituitary gland, pineal gland, hypothalamus, thyroid gland, thymus, pancreas, adrenal glands would be the same. The only difference will come when we talk about male and females, and where the endocrine system differs is the reproductive systems. So ovaries and testes, then we talk about, and the detailing of the structure of ovaries and testes that we talk about, would be differentiating the two different types of organs which are found differently in males and females. Now, if we talk about, understanding this in a bit more detail, again, there's a video that I've shortlisted. This video essentially explains, the endocrine system in a great amount of detail. This particular video would be useful to watch, because this video essentially would allow you to see the endocrine system in function, or functioning of the endocrine system. And again, this video would shed light into how essentially you're going to be looking at, going into details of the endocrine system in particular. So when we do talk about various systems in the body, what we are looking at is understanding these 7 different types of systems, which would help us understand the body functions of the human body, and how organs in particular, and organ systems in particular work. So my suggestion would be to look at reading into and understanding some of the details of these 7 systems, and by reading those articles that I've or handouts essentially that I've put together, they would be useful for you, because one, it'll be bringing your knowledge up to date, because this is something that we have obviously studied during our school days, and that would be bringing yourself up to date with the watching of the video, and then reading the handout, which will primarily mean that you now understand what are the different systems and what they essentially consist of. So after this, what I would suggest at some stage would be to look at going into some of the details of the assessment criteria, which essentially talk about what we have covered by looking at the cellular organization, the level of organization within an organism, and then going into some of the major parts of the systems, in order for us to be able to differentiate and understand the relationship between them when we do talk about them from a point of view of working of a human body or the physiology of human body. So very briefly, I think this is something that you might be able to go through yourself, because it talks about describing the cells levels of organization within an organism. So here again, we are just going into basic details because it's talking about describe. What I would suggest is we need to cover not just the definition of different types of the basic building blocks of the organisms, starting from atoms, molecules, cells, tissues, organ system, but what might be useful is to basically also put together a diagram or some sort of a picture, diagrammatic representation of how the organization happens, from the start of atoms up till at the organization level, which is to say the human body. And this would cover this particular task that we are talking about in terms of describing the levels of organization within an organism. Okay, there are slides where I've explained in a bit more detail from the initial key terminology that we covered here in terms of cell organization, which is here. But what I've done, because we are looking at discussing this in a bit more detail, so what I've done is I've created an individual slide on each of these, and some of this has come in from the workbook, which or a sort of a study book which has been provided by Ascentis, which you see on Moodle. So cells, tissues, organs, and then examples of organ system, and that explains the level of organization within an organism. So I've not taken a human body here, I've taken a organism like a rat or a mice, and obviously then explained using a diagram what is an organ system and how is it seen primarily within a particular type of organism. Yeah, any questions, anybody? Sorry, somebody who's wanting to ask a question, go ahead. Any questions?
No.
All right. The second part of the assessment criteria talks about, describing examples of major organ systems in the human body. So you remember the image that I pulled in, and these images basically talk about different types of organ systems. So the handouts that I have on Moodle are going to be useful to cover this part, because what you'll have to say is you'll have to describe a particular, organ system, which is the 7 different types. So if I start with the endocrine system or nervous system or digestive system, so what I would need to do is put up an image and then talk about the various organs which make up that particular system, and that would essentially be describing the second part, which is examples of major organ systems in the human body. So in this particular task, what I would suggest is you have to cover the 7 different types of organ systems which have been asked for you to be studied. And that is where, again, these handouts would come in quite handy, because the handouts would provide all the details of different types of these systems. And you could pick out any 7 of them, specifically if you stick to the ones which are given in the integrative content and study them in a bit more detail and bring them out, because it's talking about describe. So you're writing about 50 to 60 words for each of these type of systems to understand what you have gone through in terms of the video and the handout that I've got on Moodle. And that is what you need to rewrite to explain what do you understand by these systems. So if I was to ask you a question, what is, say, for example, endocrine system, then I should be able to write 30 to 50 words. So I would start by saying endocrine system, for example, is a complex network of glands and organs that produces and releases hormones in the body. Hormones are chemical messengers which essentially help us regulate biological processes or body functions in the body. And they could be the hormones are released into the bloodstream by the endocrine glands, and these glands consist of, pituitary, thyroid gland, adrenal gland, pancreas. You could name a few of these glands, and there are 8 glands in particular which make up the endocrine system. Now, I'll need to go into a bit of detail by talking into endocrine system by talking about what are hormones. So they are chemical messengers which are produced by endocrine glands, and they travel through the bloodstream essentially to target cells and organs where they need to show certain effects. So for example, when I'm feeling a bit moody, or I'm feeling a bit depressed, or I'm feeling a bit excited, I'm feeling a bit enthusiastic, there is release of neurophins or endorphins in your body, or different type of chemical hormones which essentially create that reaction in your body. So in some cases, if your body is feeling low on sugars, and people who have diabetes, for example, or type 1 diabetes, then in those cases, they're giving an insulin. So they're asked to eat or take some sugary intake, which allows them to increase the amount of blood sugar in their body, thereby increasing the activity in the body, and thereby reducing letharginess or laziness in the body. So in such cases, regulation of blood sugar levels would be done by insulin, which is produced, and that is produced by the endocrine gland. So this is an example of how I would explain endocrine gland. Now, there could be other bits that you could talk about. Insulin is one such example. You could talk about growth and development. So when boys are growing up and they go from a certain age group, that you would normally see the change in voice patterns which happens for boys. So that is where testosterone increase in secretion of this hormone, which is found in males, and is released by the endocrine system within the body, increases the amount of testosterone in the blood, and that leads to the hoarseness of voice, specifically in boys. It leads to the development of facial hair in the male body, and that is another example that you could give in terms of the function of the endocrine gland. Reproductive function is another function. You can also show, for example, other types or example of other type of function, which could be metabolic function. For example, when people are training to become athletes, or for example, they are essentially looking at gymming, you would generally see the endocrine function, glands, or the endocrine system essentially produces hormones in the body, specifically through thyroid, because that is another important component which regulates the amount, the body's metabolism. The thyroid is a gland, and that would be by influencing the metabolic rate at which your body actually burns food, which is stored fats and sugars in your body, and that produces energy. So that could be another example, and that would be explaining and doing this particular justice to this particular task, which talks about describing with examples major organ systems in your human body. Now, the next assessment criteria talks about relationship between structure and function of an organ system. So when you watch this video specifically of respiratory system, for example, digestive system, for example, you would see how different organ systems are actually working together. So in the respiratory system, you would see muscular, cardiovascular, respiratory, and your skeleton system working together to produce the desired effects which are required for the human body to function well. And I gave you an example that sometimes when you're out and about, or you're doing heavy physical activity, you would generally see your body's metabolism increases, the rate at which fat and sugars are being burned in your body increases. You would see your heart rate or your respiratory system, obviously your breathing and exhaling as a process increases, or the frequency at which you breathe and exhale, which is inhaling and exhaling of oxygen and carbon dioxide increases. And these are going to be examples of when you pick out any particular system to talk about the relationship between the organs and the organ systems in relation to the human body, and talking about how they would be working together to help the body perform a particular function. So when athletes actually run, or when you participate in, say, for example, any sort of a physical activity, or you start to do exercise, what you would see is that your body would come under, would start, your different organ systems in your body would actually start working together. And that is where your example of respiratory, cardiovascular, nervous system, and muscular system will come in. If I talk about from another aspect, our digestive system and respiratory system would start to work together, simply because your body needs more energy. The body would need to burn more sugars. So endocrine system would release hormones in your body to show that the person is actually doing heavy physical activity. That would mean it would tell the various other systems in the body to start metabolizing fat into energy, or sugar that is stored in the tissues into energy. And again, the endocrine system, the respiratory system, and the digestive system would come together to be able to work and then provide the source of energy which is required by the human body to undertake that physical activity. And that could be an activity wherein you're going rock climbing, or you've gone to the Lake District and you're doing a bit of a trekking trail, you're bicycling uphill, or you're essentially, doing any sort of activity which requires increased, amount of energy in your body. And that is where you're showing these different systems working together, and the relationship between different organs and organ systems working together to maintain, the normal functioning in the human body. And the last aspect of it that we would cover is we are going to explain how different organs work together to maintain normal body functioning. So here, what I would suggest is the article which I've given on Moodle, which is labeled as 1.4, and it talks about how systems work together in the human body. That particular article is what you need to read. And again, this is more or less related to the fact that it talks about how different organ systems in the human body work together to produce coordinated functions so that the human body is able to function normally. Now, I'll give you an example here to talk about this. You have heard about what is called fear and flight. Sometimes when you're faced with situations wherein you are either experiencing the flight or fight response, which is basically a psychological reaction which happens, or an event which happens within your body, which, either you're feeling stressed or you're feeling frightened. And in those cases, what generally tends to happen is when we talk about the fight and flight response, your body is trying to cope with this particular event or a response which is happening. Maybe it could be a painful event, say, for example, or a harmful event wherein your body's taken some sort of an injury. And in this case, your body is actually trying to fight that trauma, or the shock, or the condition that the body has faced, by normalizing the functions of the human body. So here, when we do talk about, how does the body actually respond when we are either faced with a threatening situation or a situation wherein your body does not quickly anticipate fear. For example, if you are standing at the edge of the mountain, or if you're planning to, say, take a jump, from a height which your body perceives to be, your body perceives that it might cause injury to you, or multiple, levels of injury to your body and your body organs, then in those cases, this kind of a psychological reaction which happens to either threat, stress, any sort of excitement, or a dangerous event would be called the flight oblique fight reaction. Now, when we talk about this in general, what you're going to see is that all your body systems would come together to basically function as a coordinated unit, and that coordinated unit would essentially produce a particular type of response. So when we talk about this particular type of response, what you're going to see is that your body essentially would work to normalize, I would say, this particular effect that you are facing, or a situation that you are essentially facing. And this particular normalization part, which the body tries to do so by either increasing your heart rate, increasing the muscle tension, or, for example, in certain situations, you start sweating because your perspiration is higher, your rate at which you're inhaling, exhaling oxygen is higher, your anxiety levels are higher. So in your case, the body will release hormones to make your body much more alert. And in some cases, you might also have responses like where you would feel that you're trembling or you're shivering sometimes. And these kind of reactions that your body essentially produces, which are automatic psychological responses, which are triggered, primarily on the basis of, how your body is trying to normalize the functions of your organ and organ systems, would be termed as what are called, fight/flight response. So this is quite an important term when we talk about flight/fight response. And this is one of the things that you would probably look at when we talk about, the aspect of how the human body essentially would be looking to maintain, normal body functions within, when you're faced with, not within, when essentially you're faced with a particular type of, say, for example, situation. And under stress, when your body tends to sweat or your body tends to tremble or you show heightened activity, wherein your body becomes super alert. Say, for example, if you're in a dark room and essentially your eyes, your hands, your body would be showing high levels of alertness, then all this is actually triggered through, your body working together as a coordinated unit when it feels that it is, in a situation wherein it could be threatening, and that is where it produces response in through all the systems coordinated and working together, and they would be helping the body essentially respond to any sort of triggers that you would see would be created when you are faced with that situation. So in those cases, I would suggest that you would be looking at, talking about how different organ and organ systems essentially, work together in order to produce this coordinated effort. So that brings us to the end of today's session. But what I want to quickly do is actually show you Moodle so that you know what are the various documents that I'm essentially mentioning that you need to go through or should be able to go through. And that would be, helping you to essentially cover the learning outcome one in a great amount of detail. So this particular presentation, which is here, and then the handouts on the different systems, I would suggest that you need to go through, would be, I would say, mandatory for you to be able to understand that how the body essentially works together when we talk about, the last assessment criteria to maintain what are called normal body functions. So that would be a handout that I would put in just now, and you should be able to see this on your side. And that is what I would suggest that you look at, reading in terms of covering this particular part of the assessment criteria, which is, 1.4. So hopefully, I hope things that we've discussed today have made sense and you understood what are we looking at covering in terms of understanding human body and the systems that it comprises of, and how these systems essentially work together, to help the human body work in as a coordinated unit, which is what the main, aim of this first learning outcome was. Is that okay? So this particular handout that I'm just uploading is what I would want you to go through, simply because this is something which is going to be important for you to understand. Okay, once we know what are the various systems, but at the end of the day, what we also need to understand is how these systems actually work together and how they help the human body to work together in a coordinated manner. So this particular part is the handout which I'm referring to, which talks about how do systems work together in the human body. And this is an extract which primarily takes an example, and discusses how the different systems, work, but also how these different systems work as a coordinated unit. That means what are the relationship between these different systems in order for the human body to be able to work as and face when they are faced with a particular situation, or how does the human body work together as a coordinated unit, as a let's say as a unit of so many systems put together, and then allows you to do normal functions on a day-to-day basis that we are expected to perform. Is this particular handout which I'm referring to, that you need to go through and understand. So some of the examples that I've taken, for example, for physical activity, gymming, when I talk about the flight response, those are bits which are all coming in from, essentially this part of the handout. And examples that I've taken are also coming from this part of the handout. Good stuff. So any questions at this stage? Any questions, anybody? Just to understand if there are any questions. So there's a bit of reading to do, for tomorrow, and that is what I would suggest that you need to look at primarily, so that it is clear that this is something that you need to be aware of, so that we can get into the discussion on learning outcome, 2. I have updated some part of the presentation as we've done some discussion today. And what I'm going to do is upload this updated version of the presentation just after the session. And you should be able to see a copy of the recording also being made available along with the presentation in this handout 1.4. All the other handouts obviously would remain the same. So there's no change in that. And I would suggest you read through these particular handouts in a bit more detail, and then we'll catch up tomorrow to discuss learning outcome 2. So till then, thank you so much for joining, and I'll see you guys tomorrow.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye for now.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye.